The issue is carbon emissions and the effect it has on greenhouse gases. A recent study showed that having a carbon tax would help us eliminate our carbon emissions and also help us with our greenhouse gases and help us meet our early agreement to the 2015 Paris Agreement. Carbon taxes can be both fair and effective, study shows. Several different carbon pricing approaches would help reduce emissions, and some would be fair as well, researchers report. Putting a price on carbon in the form of a free tax on the use of fossil fuels, coupled with returning the generated revenue to public in one form or another, can be an effective way to curb emissions of greenhouse gases. That's one of the conclusions of an extensive analysis of several versions of such proposals carried out by researchers at MIT and the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, NREL. What's more, depending on the exact mechanism chosen, such a tax can also be fair and not hurt low-income households, the researchers report. The analysis was a part of a multi-group effort to apply sophisticated modeling tools to assess the impacts of various proposed carbon pricing schemes. 11 research teams at different institutions carried out the research using a common set of starting assumptions and policies. While significant details differed, all the studies agreed that carbon taxes can be effective and, if properly designed, not need to be regressive. An overview report on the 11 studies appears today in the journal Climate Change Economics, along with the reports on individual team results. The MIT and the NREL team include former MIT postdoc Justin Caron, MIT Joint Program on the Science and Policy of Global Change co-director John Riley, and Stuart Cohen and Max Brown of the NREL. Riley, who is a senior lecturer at MIT Sloan School of Management, says the group looked at several options for a carbon tax and used the resulting revenue. They considered two different starting values, $25 and $50 per ton of carbon emissions produced, and two different rates of increase, 1% or 5% per year, as well as three different approaches to dispensing the revenue: an equal rebate to every household, a tax break for individuals, or a corporate tax break. Of the different levels of fees, the team found, not surprisingly, that the highest starting value and the highest rate of increase produces the greatest emissions reductions. But the study showed that even the lowest taxation rates could in themselves lead to reductions sufficient to meet the U.S. near-term commitment under the 2015 Paris Agreement on climate change, Riley says. However, the most efficient way of achieving those reductions in terms of the overall impact on the economy is to use the revenue to reduce taxes on capital, corporate profits, or investment income. Given the relatively high capital taxes in the U.S. at the time this study was completed, such cuts spur economic growth more than cuts in other taxes or direct rebates to households. However, that option is also the most regressive, with its impact disproportionately falling on lower income households. At the other extreme, says another scenario combining the basic strategy of providing tax breaks to corporations but adding a rebate to low-income families most affected by the tax could virtually eliminate the regressive aspects of the tax at very little cost and overall efficiency, and thus might be the most appealing option. It could have appealed both for conservatives concerned about the cost of such a program and the liberals concerned about its possible impacts on those at a lower end of the economic spectrum. It's sort of an obvious solution, Riley says. Take some chunk of the money and use it to focus on the poorest households, and use the rest to cut taxes. It doesn't seem like a hard thing. It continued, it is important to realize that this study was completed before the tax reform that took effect in January that slashed corporate income tax rates. Given that these tax rates have now been cut and that those cuts will contribute to a growing defect, we might better consider the revenue as a contribution to closing the defect. Riley's team used an economic model developed at MIT to assess the impacts of different policies on the world's likely climate trajectory, and combined that with a model of the nation's electoral system developed at NREL. The combination allowed the team to do much more detailed assessment of the way different policies would affect decisions by the power producers and distributors. A key point, since the electricity sector has the most immediate potential for changes that could reduce emissions and its biggest contributor to emissions overall. While some versions of the carbon pricing plan were found to be more efficient overall in terms of the impact on the economy, the study found that the impacts are actually quite modest. Even without taking into account potential advantages such as better health due to lower pollution levels, the least efficient policies still achieve significant emission reductions with an overall impact on just 0.4% of economic growth. For the more efficient options, the same reductions could be achieved at zero cost or even at a net gain to the economy, the researchers found. Basically, what's going on is that if we do this carbon tax, it will allow us to generate money and at the same time cut our emissions and add into the greenhouse gases. This study was brought to you by Science Daily and MIT and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Thank you.